How do you move learners from apathetic to authentic? How do you move them from being passive, where they can't find their pencil and they don't ask for a pencil, to being totally engaged in doing work on their own, not calling it homework, like making things happen? We find that it's project-based learning. How do you get your staff engaged? How do you make sure that they stay? That teacher retention question that we're all trying to answer? Having an awesome job tends to keep people to stay. Now, there's a lot that goes into that. But if you get to teach the way you've always wanted to teach, that will keep somebody there. Like, we see that again and again. You need to create the culture. You need to present the vision. And we find that in project-based learning. We hear 20-year teachers, veterans, that say, how have I not known about this? Why haven't I been teaching this way my whole life? Welcome to the PBL Simplified Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Stoyer, author of the book PBL Simplified. Not watered down. Like, what we've done with Magnify learning over the last decade is we've taken the complexity of project-based learning, we've taken that work that the innovators have done, and we've put structures in place, group contracts, planning forms, ideas, steps, so that everyone can do project-based learning. And what we didn't do is we didn't create scenario projects where you can buy curriculum and then just have everybody go do this. You can't buy our stuff on Teachers Pay Teachers. That's not the work that we do. We do skills-based training. Same thing on the podcast. I'm not giving you the prescription that you have to do. In a PBL showcase, we're descriptive. We're going to describe the great thing that's happening in a PBL unit. That's the second Wednesday. Actually, we're adding more of those because your feedback said you wanted more showcases. But it's descriptive. Then you pull the ideas out and you figure out how they work at your school. It's not prescriptive because I don't know what works best at your school district. You do. You and your staff are the closest to your learners, closest to your community. You know what's going to land. So we train you to become curriculum creators. You create experiences. You connect to your community partners. And we're there to help you walk through that. We've got tools. We've got protocols. We've got trainings. That's what we do. But no, I don't have curriculum for you. No, I don't have a whole list of PBL unit ideas that you can take and implement. We used to. We had a giant database of them, but we found that people would come take them and then try to implement them like it was magic. And what it did is it created bad PBL. So we scrapped the whole thing. We got rid of the whole database of a bunch of really great PBL units. Because if it's based on a bank CEO that's a great community partner in a rural town in western Missouri, and you're in a completely different setting and you don't have a CEO and you're over in Massachusetts, like, it doesn't work. Like, you have to have the skills to see the opportunities to bring your standards together so that your learners are engaged and amazing things happen. That's how project-based learning should work. That's what we believe at Magnify Learning and on this podcast. So that's what we talk about. So we've got to build your leadership skills as a visionary leader. We want to help you build your vision, take it off the page, bring it into your school, and watch amazing things happen. So today is a PBL leadership guest episode. So I bring on guests from business, education, or sports so that you can up your leadership game. Because it's your game. If you're a visionary leader, when you get better, everybody gets better. You have to invest in yourself, and that's part of the message from our guest today. Today we have Andre Thomas on the podcast. He works with schools. He works with leaders that are kind of new leaders, like 1 to 4 years, whether it's a principal, assistant principal, or superintendent, or assistant superintendent. Like, that's his niche. And you'll hear his story. You'll hear his why right away, because we talk about the why for education on this podcast. I think it's really important. And Andre's going to give you some tips, some tools for how to survive that 1 to 4 year time as a principal, because it determines what the 5 to 10 is going to look like. So if you haven't done that well and you're in year 7 and you're working too much on the weekends and you're burning out and there's no self-care, you're not sure what to do with your vision, you need this one too. And it's a good episode. I hope you enjoy it. All right, visionary leaders, you are in the right spot if you are looking for inspiration, looking for tools, looking to meet the right guest. This is the PBL Simplified Podcast, and that's what we do here. If you're a managing leader and you're just trying to get through the day with as little conflict as possible, you're probably in the wrong spot, actually. There's probably some other podcasts you should go hit. Because today, we've got Andre Thomas with us, and we are going to be talking about leadership. So he's got a company called True Vine Consulting, 20 years of experience in education, He talks with leaders. He coaches leaders. This is what he does. That's where his passion is. Andre, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm really excited to be here on the show.
Yeah. So you get the first question. Everybody gets the same question. And we just want to make sure that you're fired up and that you're being driven by your why, right? Not your how and your what. We always start with the why. So what's your why for the work that you do with leaders?
Well, I'll tell you that best by sharing a little bit of a story. Is back when I was a first-year principal, I worked with my direct supervisor, who was a district leader at the time, and every quarter we would meet to go over my vision casting for the year, my goals for the year, and we would meet for about 3 hours a piece. She would write my reviews. All that stuff was done in those quarterly meetings. And so the meetings went very well, positive reviews, all of that. But at the end of every meeting, she would always ask me, "What can I do for you?" And with me being first year principal at the time, untenured, I didn't want to seem like I was needy or had a ton of things going on, a ton of questions, because you're nervous. You don't want to have the bad report or seem like you just can't handle things as a leader. So I always tell her, "I'm fine, everything's going well. Thanks for asking," all of that. Um, Fast forward, probably going towards our last meeting for the year. I had been dealing with some issues in my building that I was addressing as a principal.
And everybody has, right?
Yes, and things were going well. I was handling it on top of everything. But in that last meeting, she caught me at a point where I was very vulnerable. And she asked me again, "Do you need anything? Is everything all right? What can I help you with?" And for that moment, I paused and I thought about it. I was like, you know what? She's been asking me this consistently for the last 3 times. Let me just kind of just let her know what's been going on, confirm to her that everything's okay. I'm handling it as a leader, but just so she's in the know. So I opened my heart to her because I felt at the time that this was just a trusting individual and this conversation was just between her and I. And I shared what was going on in my building, how I addressed it, how it made me feel, all of that, just sharing my heart. And I actually felt a little better afterwards. So I was like, I finally got it out. Someone other than my wife knows what's going on,
Yeah, for sure.
And so I got it out and she was like, "Okay, thank you for sharing." She gave me a few tidbits and I told her, "Hey, I appreciate that." And we moved on. Fast forward 3 or 4 months later, at the end of the year, I get this mysterious email from her, and it says, "Hey, let's meet on Monday." This is a Thursday when I got the email. "Let's meet on Monday in the HR conference room. You can bring your union rep if you'd like." Now, when you hear HR conference room, union rep, automatically your antennas go off, like, what's going on?
Right.
So I immediately emailed her back to ask her, "Can you fill me in? What's going on? Did something happen?" Her response to me was, "Oh no, everything's okay. Just want to have a talk with you. Everything's good. No worries." So I'm like, "Well, I am worried." you know, I mean, you said HR conference room and union rep in the same sentence.
Right.
I'm very worried. So it led me to reaching out to my secretary to ask her, "Am I getting grieved? What's going on?" She had no clue. So I go through the whole weekend just trying to pick my brain of what's going on.
Yeah.
So finally Monday rolls around. I arrived to the meeting with my union president. We're in this large conference room. I've got, my union rep and myself on one side of the table. Other side is my supervisor with the HR director and the district attorney, and I'm like, okay, this is interesting. So the meeting was basically her opportunity to kind of go through her notes and share her concerns with the things that I shared with her. And she was bothered by the fact that I did not address the concerns the way she had shared to me in our meeting. And it was my thought that when I told her that I handled these things already, they were being addressed. She didn't say that her ideas were mandates. They were just suggestions. And that's how I received them. And so I was totally thrown off guard in this meeting because I was being asked to remember things that were discussed 3 months prior. And I had no notes on me, nothing with me to kind of go back and look at. I'm going off of total memory. And I was obviously upset, nervous. So of course things weren't coming to me, except my emotions. So I clearly asked, why are we doing it this way? Why didn't you give me a heads up? I could have brought my notes, my materials with me to answer your questions, more thoroughly, and she kept giving me the whole thing that, oh, it's okay, you're not in trouble kind of stuff. I'm like, well, I'm not getting that energy, from the room.
Yeah, feels a little different with the district attorney here.
Yeah, you got the attorney here taking notes and stuff. I'm like, I'm not getting that energy. That it's not a bad thing. So eventually the meeting ends, and I was given a summary letter that basically summed up the meeting and told me my next steps, what I needed to do moving forward. So I had to basically write up a report on how I would address issues like that in the future, and then submit a copy to her and the superintendent. So I did all of that, to appease everyone in the room. But I was really hurt by that meeting. I was really hurt. And I walked out of that meeting feeling like, man, I'm a first year principal, and I feel like I can't trust anyone in that room.
Yeah.
And that was the main feeling I felt, was lack of trust. And I said, if I can't go to my direct supervisor, who I thought had my back and was really supporting me, then who do I go to? Who do I talk to? Who can I reach out to? So that was the main feeling. So that feeling of distrust and hurt is what led me to the idea of this business, True Vine Consulting, because for me, I wanted to help others by providing a safe space to grow, and I didn't have that safe space to grow as a new leader at that time. And I know there are many other leaders out there, because even after my incident occurred, I talked to other principals to ask them if they had similar stories. And to my surprise at the time, many of them did then and do now.
Yeah.
They don't know who to talk to. And what I've learned, even in my research, is that oftentimes principals or leaders in general, the main reason why they work in silos is because of lack of trust.
Yeah, man. What a why and a story together. I love that, because we love whys, we love stories. So, and you kind of had, because the first part of your story, you're like, oh, you're getting with your supervisor and you're like planning out, you're visioning for the quarter. It's like, yeah, I'm good with that. And then it definitely took a turn, right? It's like, wait a minute. And we get this with leaders. And this is why coaching's so important, isn't it? Is that as a leader, you have new ideas. You can't just blurt those out at a faculty meeting and share them with the staff and say, what do you think? Right? Because you can't take that back. Like once you say it, like it's out there. You can't even, and our visionary leaders listening, they know this. Like not even your assistant principal. Like you want to collaborate, but there's still some ideas that don't quite fit. And then, like you said, the supervisor, maybe not too now. So there's that silo. I phrase it like this. I phrase it as the loneliness of leadership. Right. And once you do that, right, I can't tell you. And now, like you said, you're talking to your wife about this, who's, maybe not in education, not reading all the books. It's not fair to her either. And my wife can attest to that too, I'm sure. Right. So let's talk about your niche a little bit, because your expertise is an interesting place, I think. We know we've got some organizations that are saying, hey, you're a teacher, you're a coach, you want to be a principal. Let's support you, aspiring leaders. We want to be there. And then if you've been a principal for 10 years, like you've probably figured it out, you're probably going to make it, right? We'd still need some coaching to thrive. But you're kind of talking about these like year 1 to year 4 leaders. Like, why do we need to be talking about that group specifically?
Well, the first few years of a leader's career are the most crucial, and in most states that have tenure, I know in New York State, where I'm from, the tenure track is 4 years before you gain tenure. And so within that 4-year track, if a school feels that you're not a good fit, they can cut you loose, and so then you got that stress of a leader, like, man, I gotta make this work, to get tenure, so there's that pressure. So again, they don't want to seem incompetent. So they're not asking a ton of questions. They don't want to, they're not showing their vulnerabilities in those first few years because they're worried about not getting tenure and seeming like a liability to that district that they're working for. So, I target new leaders because they're the ones that really, really need the most support. I think all leaders can benefit from coaching, whether you're in your first year or your 10th year. So I'm not against veterans, but really the first year, those are the crucial years because they tell the story of how your career is going to go down the road. If you don't feel supported the first few years and you're timid to ask questions, you're prepping the stage to become to become an individual working on a silo.
Yeah. Well, that's so good. You need a term for that 1 to 4 year, right? Because it is such an integral part, and kind of what you just kind of laid out is if you're looking at tenure, then you're doing whatever you can the first 4 years, right, to get to that 5th year, which means you're working on the weekends, you're working at night, and it's like, if that works for you, then that's what you're going to continue to do. And that's why I've got to work with leaders then to say, hey, let's pull back the hours on the weekend. Let's put your life has to be sustainable on both sides of the desk, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, do it. Go.
Yeah. So I just read some data a day or so ago, and it said that 34% of principals leave within 1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's within my demographic, and then I think back in 2022, so this last year, the NASSP, the National Association for Secondary School Principals, had some data that said just under 40% of school leaders say they're leaving within the next couple of years, and one of the main reasons for leaving is well-being, their general well-being, their mental health on the job, lack of support, so all those things play a big role where you have these leaders who are, carrying these heavy loads on their shoulders out their building. They're being everything to their staff, everything to their students. I've lived that life, and everyone turns to them, but who do they turn to when they need support, when they need a shoulder to lean on, and usually most districts are not designed to support leaders the way they need to be supported, because as leaders, we have internal struggles, internal, things that are really impacting our leadership. And we don't always talk about those in public. We wear masks, in public. We want to be that well-positioned leader that can go through anything and handle it all in public. But in private, we're struggling.
Yeah. Well, and just to push on that bruise right there is like, and I'll say this to anybody, entrepreneurs, business leaders, education, like the principal job is one of the hardest jobs in the country, literally, because you've got so many direct reports. If you're a middle school principal, you've got 40 direct reports from the custodian to, a teacher that has a doctorate. Like, that's it. There's nobody else that has that. Like at Dell, at Apple, like nobody has that many direct reports. So it's a hard job. And what I see happen, Andre, and you can, I'm gonna tee this one up for you here in a second, because we'll say, hey, what about coaching? I'll say, well, I'm gonna invest that money in my people. But I said, what about coaching? That's investing in your people, right? If you're investing in the person at the top, right, that's leading, then you're investing in everybody that's in that organization. And we see here, I'm going to tee this up for you, because we see a lot of professional development with teachers, and you should, and we do a lot of that at Magnify Learning, right? But we also look at the principals. Why do you think we don't see as much principal PD out there or leadership training?
Yeah, oftentimes principals are overlooked because, again, they're seen as the instructional leaders of the building. So there's the misconception that, they have all the answers. So let's focus on the teachers. And again, that's great. The teachers, whatever we can give teachers, let's give it to them. They deserve it. They need all the support they can get. And I'm a big supporter of teachers and PD. But oftentimes the principals, the PD that we get is typically whatever the teachers are getting. We're asked to either just kind of sit in with the teachers and get what you can get from that. Or if it's in the budget for us to go to a conference, in the summer, off year, you're going to hear topics like vision casting, discipline, classroom management, You know, all the, I mean, those are some of the hot topics that you're going to hear. Enhancing, you know, instruction, you know, all of that. Those are the hot topics, and those are all great topics and necessary. But to me, those are surface level things, items. You know, until you have something that's going to allow the leader to dig deep into what's going on internally. You know, I'm good enough as a principal, or when I was a principal, that I can play the role. I can put the game face on. You know, I mean, I ran a pretty successful school. We had a 97% graduation rate, you know, in my school, one of the top schools in the western region of New York State. We had a very, very good school that I ran, high school that I ran for a number of years. And I could easily slide in there, and you look at my numbers, everything's great, but no one knew, except outside of my wife and a couple of key colleagues of mine, knew what I was going through as a young principal. The challenges, the fears, the internal pressures, you know, all those different things that were going on internally for me. And the PD that I went to, the conferences I went to, they were great, but they really didn't tap into what I was going through as a leader, you know. And that's the part that gets overlooked in conferences. They're not designed to really dig deep and to really, you know, get into the deep level issues that we struggle with.
Yeah, that's so good. I like your definition too. Like, I'm not against conferences. That's just not what they're designed to do, right?
Oh.
And we do coach, like at Magnify Learning, every workshop we do, you have to do mandatory coaching with your teachers, because we've seen the difference. Like, you need coaching when you're in the moment, right?
Yep.
So I think that's what leadership coaching does for our principals, right? You work with principals, assistant superintendents, and that like first entrance of their career. So, but what I notice sometimes is like coaching's super popular in the business world. Sometimes in education, we don't see that leadership coaching as something that's a norm yet. And I hope that's a yet. So can you just give our audience, like, what is leadership coaching and maybe a success story that you've had?
Sure. Well, first, I want to just kind of probably focus on the stigma that you kind of referenced to.
Yeah, good. Okay.
So there's the stigma within the education world that oftentimes when I meet with educators in public and I tell them what I do, they say, "Oh, you work with the bad principals."
Oh, no.
And I mean, that's not what it is at all.
No.
I work with good leaders who have come to the realization that in order to become great leaders, they need someone to connect with who is going to you know, push them, encourage them, and help pull out, you know, the greatness that's within them. That's what I do.
Yeah.
And I work with great leaders who want to become even better in what they do, because they realized that there are still some things in their leadership that need to be addressed, and they need a good coach to come in and help pull those things out so they can become even more successful. For their schools.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Jordan had a coach, right? Like, in fact, Michael Jordan had 3 coaches, right? Like, he had a strength coach, he had a mindset coach, he had Phil Jackson, right? It's like, he's the best, right? And he had coaches because he saw the value of those coaches.
Yes, true. I mean, you referenced, you know, CEOs. I mean, the corporate world for decades have tapped into this. You know,
that's right.
They invest in their leaders because they know that they invest in their leaders, it's going to have a positive impact on the corporation as a whole. You know, so they tapped into that. As you mentioned, the sports world. You know, every top athlete, you know, whether it be football, basketball, NFL, hockey, soccer, they all have coaches they work with on the off seasons. You know, and that coach's job is to figure out, okay, we saw your tape from last season. Here are the things you got to work on. If you're a quarterback, you know, you got to work on your hip motion when you throw on the football. You know, you got to make sure if your hips are aligned the right way, you'll throw a tighter spiral and a more accurate pass. So we're going to focus on that this summer to get you ready for training camp. That's what they do. They pinpoint the issue and they work on it through repetition. You know, we're the same way. We do the same thing. We offer supports.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I love your work. So I wanted you to be on the podcast, because it's so important that, honestly, I didn't know there was a stigma about it out there, but we've got to crush that, because I know there are some companies where you can't be the CEO unless you agree to be coached, because like, it's just a standard support structure. So, so I think where we want folks to go is like, it's not a crutch, but it'll take you from good to great, right? And it's an investment in, and we have a lot of humble visionary leaders like that listen to the podcast, and we talk about coaching. They say, well, I can't take my PD money away from my people, but it's like, you're not doing that, right? Like when you invest in yourself, you're investing in your people. So can you kind of walk us through what coaching would look like though? Can you give us a peek into that for our listeners that haven't done it? Because if it is an unknown, like I understand that you might not invest in that. So how can we kind of shed some light on that? What would a coaching relationship look like if you're coaching a principal?
Sure. Well, first, if I'm a principal and you're hearing this podcast and you're interested in getting a coach, the first thing I would do, because really this is investing in yourself. Oftentimes as principals, we invest in others all day.
Yes.
As part of our job is to invest in others, to give others our time, our heart, our attention. Now it's time to invest in yourself as a leader. So the first thing I would do if you're working within a school district, I would go to your district office, maybe your HR department, maybe your professional development director, and ask them, is there funding available? Because there's things like the ESSER funds. There's federal funding out there that's available to all school districts. And a lot of them, use it for PD or coaching. I've worked with districts that actually they use ESSER funds or other funds coming in to help pay for these things for their leaders. So I would start there and ask, hey, is there anything available for me as a leader where, that'll help benefit me through coaching? I mean, is there a pocket of money that you can invest in me as your leader, and see what they say. Sometimes you maybe get a yes, you might get a no. If you get a no from your district, now the ball's in your court. So what are you willing to do yourself? If your district is not able to provide, are you willing to take that step to find out, okay, it may have to come out of my own pocket, but what's the cost? What cost for the peace of mind that I need right now? I talked to a principal. So I went to a leadership conference about 2 months ago here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live. And I sat down at a table with a superintendent from a local district. He just randomly sat down, next to me, and we had small talk. And we're about the same age. We both taught. We were teachers. We both taught history, so we had that in common. We talked about the classroom, becoming principals, all of that. And he said, and I asked him, I said, so why are you a superintendent now? That was like always your goal to move up the ladder? He said, actually, no, it wasn't at all. He said, if I could, I'd still be a principal right now, because I got into education because I love to work with the children, and now I barely see them. I'm with all adults, in an office building. I said, well, why'd you shift to superintendency then? He said, because I gave my all to the principalship, and I wore many hats, and it wore me out. He said, I loved it, but I barely saw my family. I was hardly ever home. It caused a lot of issues personally. And he said that if I had someone in my corner to show me how to better prioritize my time and manage it better and this and that, then I'd probably still be a principal right now. But now I'm a superintendent and I'm fine, but I'm not in my happy spot. And he was completely open with me, within a 10-minute conversation. And I was like, wow, wow. So imagine if he had someone in his place, in his corner, to support him as a principal, he'd probably still be in that role thriving right now, fighting with his family and still build a school. So I encourage leaders that if you can't get the money from your district to support you in that, then you've got to make a decision for yourself. Is it worth it, to come out of the rut that I'm probably in right now to make this investment? We invest in other things. We invest in stocks. We invest in Bitcoin. We spend money on all different kinds of things, real estate. It's time to invest in yourself.
Yeah. And I invest in all those things because I want return in the future. Right. And I do invest in all those things. Like, I'm not making that up as theoretical because I want what's best in the future. And you know what? I was thinking about the stigma piece. Like, so I also just want to talk, like, I have a coach. Like, I personally have a leadership coach. I'm also part of a mastermind.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in those things. Like, we have those at Magnify Learning too. Like, we have masterminds where you can get with other principals. When I work with principals and leaders, it's like the first thing we do is like, what's your weekend time look like, right? And then we start to look at how much are you sleeping, how much are you moving,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like all these things that
Yeah.
I don't even need to talk about education with you yet, right? Because if you're not doing these other things, it's your work suffering at work. So
Absolutely.
I believe in those things. I invest in those things in myself. So I have no problem asking other folks to invest. Like I've seen the benefit. My wife has seen the benefit. Like she won't let me not have a coach.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've gotten to that point, but like the coach is always going to be in the budget because I'm a better person and a better leader at work and at home. So So Andre, I think hopefully we've painted the picture well. And our visionary leaders, like we want to be innovators for a long time. Like we don't want to innovate for 3 years and go do something else. We want to do it for the long haul. So just like a marathon, you don't start out with a sprint. Like what's some advice you have for leaders that want to be innovating for the long haul, not just a spark?
So the first thing I would say is, again, get a coach. That's the first step. As you mentioned yourself, that you have a coach. I too have 2 coaches that I work with. I also am involved also in a meeting with several other leaders. We get together twice a month and talk about not just our businesses, but we talk about family, all of that. And it's the mastermind is awesome. I mean, if you can get to a mastermind, I encourage anyone out there. It's fabulous. Great experience. And the thing is too, just before I answer your question, I just wanted to share with you just kind of my story of how coaching has helped me. I wish I had a coach as a principal. I wish I knew what I know now when I was a principal. Because now that I have a coach, it's allowed me to really target some of the things that I struggled with when I was a school leader and that I still struggle with currently as a leader and now as an entrepreneur. And in the last few months, I can say that I've seen the benefits tremendously with my business. Again, when I went to that conference a few months ago, the old me is, I can be very shy, kind of like when I go to a conference with 1,000 people, I take my laptop, I sit in the back corner and I take notes. I don't really engage with anyone. My coaches told me when you get there, you got to let them know you're there, and go in and meet people, converse with people, talk about your business, network, all of that. For me, that was getting outside of my comfort zone because naturally I'm an introvert, so I had to go in. I spoke affirmations in the car, driving up to the conference room, just encouraging myself. And when I walked into that room, that huge conference room, the first struggle for me was, okay, find a place to sit. There's hundreds of people here. I don't know, you don't know any of them, but you got to sit next to somebody and spark up a conversation at random. And that's how I met the superintendent. I just saw a table, an empty chair, walked up to him, introduced myself, and went from there. And after every breakout session that I attended, I made sure that in those sessions, I raised my hand and either asked a question or I shared my expertise in a certain area. So the presenters and everyone in that room heard my voice and saw my face. After each session, I went to the presenters and thanked them for presenting and gave them my card. And we had conversations afterwards. And I linked up with them the very next day, through email. And for me, that was my game plan, and I went beyond, what I normally would have done in the past. But I walked in there with confidence because of the 2 coaches that I work with on a weekly basis. They helped me, they helped bring that out of me. It was always there, but they helped dig deep and help bring that up. So I'm excited for what my future looks like because I can see it's so much brighter now because those fears that I allowed to cripple me in the past, I now see I see a brighter future.
That's so good. And visionary leader, if as you're listening to this, I just want you to hear the passion around coaching and masterminds, and ask other people. Like, and you're probably like, yeah, I hear other people talk about that a lot. I don't know of a whole lot of people that don't get fired up once they get into coaching, because it's such a lift personally. And if you're not into the soft, fluffy stuff and the feelings, like you just heard Andre talk about, like there are very systematic growth opportunities for him that came out of the coaching, right? And so we need both. Like you need both. You need to figure out your why and get into those pieces. But hopefully we're getting this where leadership, coaching, masterminds are a piece of education. It's a normal thing, because it should be. It helps us become excellent. Now, Andre, we're going to put your contact info in the show notes. So if anybody's got any questions, they can reach out to you. You also do, like we've talked about, you do one-on-one leadership coaching. You do some crisis management piece too, which is pretty interesting to me. Like crisis management coaching, that's not one that I do. I don't think, right? Like that's not. Can you talk to that one for just a second?
Sure. So one thing as school leaders, I mean, we deal with crisis on a regular basis. You know, it could be anything from, a fight in the cafeteria, to a bomb threat, to unfortunate, I hate to say this, but sometimes we deal with, deaths, either of a staff member, a student, or whatever it may be. I mean, the most recent crisis we all experienced was COVID, really handling that, and we're still dealing with the aftermath from that, so there's a lot of cases where every school in the country deals with crisis on a regular basis, and not every school is positioned to handle that crisis in the best way, because sometimes it takes a crisis to prepare for the next one, and because everyone hasn't had a certain level of crisis, there's probably nothing in writing to prepare for it, or their current plan is out of date, it doesn't tie into the current times. You got to pull it out and dust it off to even read it. It's so old.
Right.
So there's a lot of schools out there that have outdated crisis management plans. And so one of the things that I do is I go in and I work with the crisis management teams that most schools have. It could be the principal, assistant principal, a school counselor, social worker, but I'll go and I'll meet with that team, and we'll go through what they currently have in place, and we'll work together to either rebuff it, or redo their current plan. They could be currently in a crisis.
Sure.
And they're saying, man, I mean, this is a PR nightmare. We've got our families are going to board meetings and going off, and all this chaos is going on. What do? We have a crisis going on right now. I can come in, and offer supports to the school board on what to say, what not to say in a public forum, all of that, because a lot of it I've experienced as a principal. Right. Unfortunately, in my first year, I think I had a bomb threat, a gas leak, and a few other things. I had a power outage in the middle of the school day, in my first year, which is kind of crazy. I could write a book on that stuff, but I had to figure out ways on how to get through that successfully and make sure that all of our parents were notified appropriately. The right language was used in the emails. All of that you have to think about when you have a crisis. Communication is key. All that's done. So I work with those leadership teams in making sure that everything top to bottom is thought of and planned for the future.
Yeah. And if you're listening regularly, Visionary Leader, just last week we had Kim Hamer on, and Kim talked about, what do you do when a staff member has cancer, or one of their loved ones has cancer? Like there are right and wrong things to say, right? And we gave you some feedback, gave you some really like practical steps for that. And Andre is doing the same thing here now, right? It's like when you have that very specific piece that Kim can walk you through, Andre is going to be the one that you bounce the ideas off of. Like, hey, here's what I'm thinking about telling my staff, right? And you need to say that out loud, but you don't let it be the first time you say those words out loud is to your staff, right? Like that's one of the great things a leadership coach can do is just, all right, you're going to have to say something. What are you going to say? And then literally walk through it. And then, because you don't want to stumble, you don't want to say the wrong thing. So
Absolutely.
What a great service, Andre. I appreciate that value. And
yes.
As you're listening, like that's part of the podcast is if I don't have it, like that's not a skill set I have, I'm going to bring somebody on that does, right? Like I'm okay, like knowing that's not my expertise, but let me bring somebody on that does have that. Andre, thanks for coming in and just adding so much value to the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. This was awesome.
All right. Visionary leaders, you need a leadership coach. Hopefully you got that message. If you've got questions, like seriously, you can reach out to Andre. He'll talk to you about it. And he's not going to hard sell you. He's going to tell you if it's a good idea for you. I'm happy to do the same thing, but you need to talk to somebody about that. You need somebody that you can bounce ideas off of, somebody that's going to push you, somebody that's outside of your sphere that you're leading. It's a really important piece for you. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're a visionary leader, would you share this one specifically? Because this is such a leadership void in education. Like we need more coaches. We need people in more masterminds supporting the work because it's not easy, but it's insanely important to the work and to the world. And as you do this, as you up your leadership game, you're going to engage your learners, tackle boredom, and transform your classrooms. So go lead inspired.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the PBL Simplified Podcast. I appreciate you. I'm honored that you tune in each week. Would you please take 2 minutes to leave a rating and a review? When you leave a review, it lets the next person know that this is a podcast worth listening to. When they go into their player and search project-based learning and PBL Simplified popped up, when they see those reviews, they know that high-quality visionary leaders are listening. So they tune in too, and they can find their way into the PBL journey. Thank you so much for leaving a review. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you.